So, Miami qualifying is done, and honestly, there is a lot to talk about because the grid looks pretty mixed heading into Sunday. Starting in Q1, Gabriel Bortoleto ended up P22 after being disqualified from the sprint and having work done on the car. It was already a messy day for him and Audi. They did manage to get the car out, but it was clearly lacking performance. And to make things even worse, the brakes caught fire on the way back to the pits. That is definitely not the kind of image Audi wants. But at the same time, they are a new team on the grid, so rough weekends like this are probably part of the learning process. In P21, we have Sergio Perez had a really disappointing qualifying for Cadillac at their home race. It just looks like they didn't find anything after the sprint, especially when you compare them to Aston Martin, who clearly made a step forward. Valtteri Bottas was P20, and even though he beat his teammate, the overall pace just was not there. They were still quite a bit slower than the Astons, and that has to be frustrating because this is not where they would want to be. Lance Stroll took P19, and Aston Martin at least looked a bit better than they did in the sprint. They seem to have found some time, which is encouraging even if they are still not close to where they really want to be. Fernando Alonso was P18, beating Stroll and looking much more competitive relative to the pack than we've been used to seeing recently. It still wasn't enough for Q2, but at least there were some positive signs. Then, in P17, Arvid Lindblad was the final driver knocked out in Q1. Racing Bulls just seems to be struggling in Miami, and there was only so much he could do. Moving into Q2, Alex Albon qualified P16. Williams still look stuck in the awkward middle ground where they are not slow enough to be at the very back, but not quick enough to really threaten the top 10. That makes tomorrow pretty difficult if they want points. Esteban Ocon was P15 for Haas, and it was kind of the same story. Decent enough, but nothing especially impressive. And they look to be right in that same midfield fight as Williams. Carlos Sainz put his Williams in P14, beating Albon, but just like the Haas cars, the bigger question is whether there is actually enough race pace there to move forward tomorrow. Ollie Behrman was P13, and fair play to him for beating his teammate, but again it feels like one of those results that looks solid on paper without necessarily giving you loads of confidence for the race. Liam Lawson took P12, and I think that is actually a pretty good effort. That Racing Bulls car did not look particularly convincing, so getting it that close to Q3 was probably the maximum. And then in P11 we have Nico Hülkenberg in Audi, which is honestly a respectable recovery considering how bad things looked on the other side of the garage. Audi will definitely be hoping he can turn that into points on Sunday. Now into Q3, Pierre Gasly qualified P10, and I think that is a good result for him. Just getting into the top 10 is a nice achievement considering how tight the midfield is. Isaac Hadjar was P9, and you have to wonder if he is running into the same problem that seems to hit almost every teammate Max Verstappen has had, just trying to live with the benchmark on the other side of the garage. Franco Colapinto was P8, and that is another seriously impressive performance. To back up what he did yesterday and out-qualify both Pierre and Hadjar again is a really strong statement. Oscar Piastri could only manage P7, and McLaren just seems to lose something from the sprint to qualifying. Oscar never really looked comfortable, and this was definitely more of a struggle than expected. Lewis Hamilton qualified P6, and while he was closer to Charles, he still was not close enough. He is going to need a strong race tomorrow if he wants to really challenge at the front. George Russell was only P5, and compared to Kimi Antonelli, that has to feel disappointing. He just never looked as comfortable or as fast, and I am sure he expected more. Lando Norris ended up P4, which feels pretty underwhelming after winning the sprint. It looks like everyone else found performance while McLaren maybe went the other way a bit. They just did not seem to have the same edge they had yesterday. Charles Leclerc put in a strong lap for P3, maybe second was possible with an absolutely perfect run, but overall this is still a really good place to start and he should absolutely be in the fight tomorrow. Max Verstappen took P2, and this is classic Max and Red Bull. After not looking fully on top earlier in the weekend, they seem to have found something when it mattered the most. Suddenly, they look very dangerous again. And then on pole, Kimi Antonelli. What a response after a disappointing sprint. This is his third consecutive Grand Prix pole position, and as a championship leader, he just keeps delivering. He is extracting everything from that Mercedes right now, and this was a seriously impressive lap. So overall, the big story for me is Kimi bouncing back in style, Max and Red Bull recovering really well, and McLaren seemingly losing the advantage they had earlier in the weekend. Ferrari also looked properly in the mix, which could make the race really interesting. And with the rain expected tomorrow, we really can't predict what will happen. So subscribe and catch tomorrow's race review.